Maria Ocampo from ISS PhD community, and we have three discussants. One is Dr. John Cameron that you already introduced to this morning. The second discussant is our second day keynote speaker, Walsh. Dr. Catherine Walsh is an activist intellectual, long engaged in the struggles for social justice, first in the United States and in the last 20 years in Ecuador and Latin America, where she has worked collaboratively with indigenous and Afro-descendant social movements. She was an official advisor to Ecuador's 2008 Constitutional Assembly and has been involved in initiatives and debates throughout the Andes and the Americas on decolonization and transformation, including of the models of knowledge, development, society, and state. Catherine's present work is focused on the political, epistemic, and ethical project or critical interculturality on concerns of decoloniality, particularly with regard to the interrelated themes of race, gender, knowledge, and nature, and on socio-political pedagogies of resistance, insurgency, and existence otherwise. Her extensive list of books and articles published in Latin America, North America, and Europe cross the field of critical development studies, social and human sciences, cultural studies, education, and law. Catherine is presently Senior Professor and Director of the Doctoral Program in Latin American Cultural Studies. Let me try this. Universidad Andina Simón Bolivar.
Muy bien.
In Ecuador, and visiting professor in Roman Studies at Duke University. And our last discussant, but not least, is Dr. Rosalba Icaza. Dr. Rosalba Icaza is academic member of the ISS. She works on international studies and political economy, and apart from being an academic, she's also a feminist and an activist. Angelica Maria, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So now we are starting with this dynamic of bridging our voices, since now till tomorrow, and after that, who knows where and how. The idea of this space right now, the hour that we have together, it's to try to bring this. First, our experiences. All of us are researchers, but maybe we come from many different places. Some of us come from Africa, others from Latin America, others from North America, Europe, and all together we are here, men, women, some of us with roots from indigenous tradition, others from so many different backgrounds. Many of us are involved in academia, many others in NGOs, others are working in international agencies, but all of us came here attending to this call of bridging voices. So what does it mean in the end? Is it possible to bridge voices in such a diverse experiences and different ways of thinking, feeling, perceiving reality, perceiving ourselves, perceiving power? John gave us his view about, for him, what means bridging and what means bridges. And Catherine tomorrow is going to do the same in her own way and departing from her experience. But now, Rosalba also. Rosalba is going to share that experience with us. And the challenge now is that we are going to open the floor first to react, Rosalba and Catherine, and then I'll give you the mic. So it's a moment right now just to have a look of what John shared with us, but not only thinking about it, situating yourself. So, where are you coming from? What discipline are you coming from? What it says to you? Can we take all of this as a granted? What is interesting? What or from where are you taking distance of these statements? We are trying to build this idea of critical thinking, critical feeling, critical experience about what we are doing every day from our different place of creating knowledge with others, for others, other knowledge, other knowledges, knowledges otherwise, knowledges within. So we are deconstructing or rebuilding or constructing beyond. Are we post-structuralist? Are we decolonialist? Are we positivist? Are we social constructivist? Do we want to be in boxes or not? What are our transits, our dilemmas, our ethical questions? Is ethics different from epistemology, from methodology? Is creating knowledge something different from politics? What is the role of politics or of the political thinking in our research exercise? Many of you have written books, others journal articles in top journals, others just pieces of work and book chapters, others simple papers in PhD process. Maybe others never have written in this, but have create materials with others. So you are very welcome to ISS. ISS is a home for diversity. I think it's a home for interculturality. And it's interculturality, our challenge here at ISS, what it means when we are building knowledge together. And this event tries just to put our voices, our experiences here, and we decide what is bridge for us, what we want to bridge together, or maybe to not. No, it's like, and no final answers, just initial questions. We are working together the whole 2 days, presenting our researches, presenting our dilemmas, maybe our frustrations, and hopefully our hopes. And we are going to close tomorrow with, we don't know with what kind of things would emerge from today till tomorrow. And this is DD, just an open space to bridge our experiences and voices and to dialogue with them and with others. So, Rosalba, okay. Just, you can express whatever you think or feel or perceive, whatever. So, Rosalba can start, then Catherine, and then all of you, all of us. And we have time, by 11:30 we have to cut, a little bit before. So it doesn't mean that it's the end, it's just the starting point. And keep your notes if we don't have the time to discuss everything today, or if many of you cannot talk, let's try to do it as much as we can, and let's continue with this in spirit, with this inspiration. And we have great inspirators with us today, and you are inspirators for all of us. So welcome to ISS, and I open the discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would suggest first just a brief reactions, and then we start. And then maybe we come back to John, because he already had an hour to talk, so it's time to talk for us. But then, in the end, we can give him a kind of short time to reflect. And if you want to continue the conversation during the breaks, panels, and everything, so we'll be here.
Okay, well, thank you, Angelica. Thank you, everybody, for being here. So, well, since 8:45, that it was very early. Let me start with, first of all, with some kind of connection to what John was reflecting upon. And the first connection that I want to draw upon is on his first statement, that everything that we are researching is the product, if not the outcome of a particular experience of uneasiness or difficult times in which we try to make sense of the world that we are experiencing. And when I was listening to him, and when I was listening to the concepts of position yourself, situate yourself, be self-reflective, I was thinking myself on my own experience as PhD student several years ago in the UK, and I was thinking, oh my God, what I never had, why I didn't have the opportunity of hearing someone telling these kind of important and relevant concepts and how they possibly relate to my own research. And I was thinking myself on how difficult was, again, my time as a PhD researcher in an academic environment that was completely alien from who I am, from how I was conceiving myself, and of course, to the position, especially my political position in relation to the topic that I was doing research upon. So for me, it was a very good opportunity to hear you, John, especially remembering my very dry years while I was a PhD student. But let me also, in the spirit of sharing and in the spirit of thinking about critique, not as a pretentious activity of reason or reasoning, but something that might help us to build upon some bridges. Let me just try to react to some of the things that you were talking to us and that I really enjoy because it provoked me more questions. First of all, I appreciate your effort to bring visual images and metaphors, because this is a way of connecting our aesthetic dimension that is, of course, not only about how we think and reason, but also how we feel, about emotions. And for me, this way of presenting your ideas is a way of destabilizing, deconstructing, challenging the way in which we have been produced as supposedly beings in which our emotions and our minds are separated. So I appreciate very much that you bring this way of thinking about our research as international development, whatever this means, experts or students or researchers. But I have this question to you: why not going all the way down into that? What I perceive in the presentation is that even though you are using metaphors and your aesthetic appreciation in order to develop a critical approach of how research could be, I still perceive this division between emotions and rational thinking, or the rational being. So I wonder why. And I also wonder, because I know that you're a terrific pedagogist, if you can share with us some other ways and some other strategies that you have used here in ISS to actually connect these two areas, these two dimensions of our multiple beings. The second reaction that I have is probably the one that make me more, let's say, I wouldn't say critical, but it makes me react more strongly, and it's the way you define what is an epistemic position. And I remember that you mentioned the word authority. And then you started to talk about the importance of being self-reflective. So my reaction with my guts, with my thinking, with my emotion is, which are the ontological bases in which you are standing to actually relate epistemology or an epistemic position to authority? And I will ask you to be, and sharing with us, which are the ontological basis, the nature, the essence, if we don't want to use ontology, that is behind your own idea of what is supposed to be research, what research is supposed to do for knowing, and of course, behind all of this, what is the role of research from this ontological basis from which you are standing? What is supposed to do in relation to development? So, yes, I will leave it there because I know that these are very tough questions. I'm doing them from the basis of, let's say, of sharing and trying to bridge. And yeah, and I thank you because you provoke me these kind of ideas. Yeah.
Catherine. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, John, for a really stimulating, thoughtful presentation that, as Rosalba said, gave us sort of the visual dimension that oftentimes isn't present, particularly in academic settings. I was also very interested in how you use the bridges, because tomorrow when it's my turn, I'm going to do something a little bit similar, but a little bit different. So it'll be interesting to see those kinds of connections. But I think the organizers of this event sort of challenged us to play with this notion of bridges. And so the issue is, how do we do that, right? But I was also remembering your first slide, before we even got to the title of your talk and your name, right, the boat. And the symbolism in that boat, but also the way you described it. And you started off with the issue of difference, the issue of race, of racism and raciality, and how that affected you, your own subjectivity. And I think that's an important issue to think about. And I sort of want to pose this as talking points that we can begin to think about the rest of today and tomorrow. What does it mean when a researcher begins to talk about herself or himself first and sort of situates their subjectivity, which we know we're told not to do in academia, right? We're supposed to be neutral. So how is it that you started off with you, with your own childhood? But then I began to wonder, where did you go? Because you didn't come up on any of those other bridges. Occasionally you mentioned, oh, I stood on that bridge, or I saw that scene of the bridge from a certain point, but your subjectivity went away. So it made me think also about how many times when we approach research, making our subjectivity and our localizations present, somehow in the research process they disappear. And all of a sudden, the authority of the researcher and the authoritative process of research takes over. So I sort of wanted to pose that maybe as a reflection point that we could take together. But also the notion of research itself with relation to the bridge. I mean, if we think about research, the researcher, and the researched, those subjects, not objects, that are being studied, supposedly, where do they end up on the bridge? I was remembering the bridge, I can't remember where it was exactly, but the bridge that you call the lingering place, the critical lingering, yes. And so I was wondering, well, are those the research that sort of hang around for the researcher to look at? Or is the researcher one of the lingerers as well? And so how do we shift those relationships of authority, of domination, of what it means to be the researcher and the researched, and how we shift those, and how the bridge maybe is a metaphor, is a tool to begin to think about that. I was also interested, to go back to the issue of difference, about how difference also disappeared in the rest of the discussion. So in the beginning, you began with how it was with the arrival of Jamaican men on the boat, that it made you think about race and challenge your own whiteness that maybe you hadn't thought about before. But then I thought, well, that wasn't mentioned again. So how does difference sometimes also pop up in the research process, but then go away? Again, because of the authority of the researcher. But what happens, and how do we begin to make difference a central part of the research endeavor? And even more so when we talk about this thing called development, which I'm going to talk about tomorrow, which I really don't like that word. But it's sort of hard to say that here. But that's another issue. So I was sort of thinking about, as you begin to weave in the issue of knowledge, of epistemology, but also agency, how does one's geopolitical location, one's geoepistemic location, and one's body appear or disappear in the process? So that we saw many bridges empty of people, no bodies present, or bridges that seemed to go nowhere, or bridges that went somewhere, but we're not sure if a person crossed and went back, or just crossed and stayed. So to begin to give some kind of visual sense to the geopolitical, the geoepistemic, and the geocorporal, or the bodies, I think is extremely important. So that helps us also to connect, again, with the issue of difference. That many people that live in bodies that have been racialized, that have been genderized, that have been sexualized, can't leave body behind. But how many times does the research endeavor whiten and westernize and make the body go away? So I think those are interesting things to think about. Also, what happens, you mentioned a couple of times, the notion of truth, of good solid knowledge. And I kept wondering, what is that? Whose knowledge? Whose knowledge is good and whose knowledge is bad? And what is solid knowledge? Is it not better to think of knowledges in the plural? And knowledges that are all situated, that are localized, that are on different places maybe on those bridges. But is there a danger in thinking about truth, good solid knowledge, as the epistemological route that doctoral students are supposed to take? I'll talk a little bit about my own doctoral experience tomorrow and being very disobedient. And finally, I think the issue of the market, you mentioned market forces. It seems the word market is very present in ISS. I've heard that in the Siri forum the past few days, and I kept trying to figure out, how are people thinking about market here? When I think about market, I think about the problem of global capitalism, but not just in economic sense, and how global capitalism really has organized life. And so how it organizes feelings, being, knowledge, right? Locations, movements. And so making present maybe the presence today here in Europe, but in other places of the Western world and the so-called global South, the ways that global capitalism plays out maybe also brings a different turn to think about development in more critical ways. Also bringing in the issue itself of agency. And so how do people, subjects, not objects of study, begin to also engage with the reality of capitalism and maybe begin to build different bridges or deconstruct the bridges that have not enabled them or not allowed them to move. So with that, I'll finish.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So now we got some inspirations. We are provoked, I guess, or maybe not. So now I'll give you the voice. So just rise your
Shuchi.
Hi, my name is Shuchi, and I was a PhD student at ISS, and I graduated last year. Sorry, I missed the morning session, but John Cameron was my first teacher here, and I came to do a PhD that was very subjective, very reflexive. It was all about me. I wanted to do the PhD because I had certain dilemmas and questions about who I was and where I was. I was doing on sexualities and development. So it started from a very personal note. And being in academia, again, for, kind of a commitment for the next 4 or 5 years was problematic. And then you don't know how you, make yourself valid in that kind of subjective positioning in academia that requires you to be of a certain kind. And it was John Cameron who, in the beginning, we had 2 semesters with him and made me very confident and comfortable in that position, that this is where you go from. So I'm very, very grateful and indebted to him for that. And say that, being yourself is fine in academia, that's cool. And then, it is cool in the end. So I was thinking of the whole idea of bridge. I come from Bangladesh, and bridges, if you think of the image, it's a very development project where, there's money and there's an urban infrastructure. But traditionally, bridge is what is called shako, which is a rickety bamboo structure that goes from one canal to the other. And you have to be really brave to know how to actually get onto that. So the PhD itself was trying to be from this end to that end on a rickety bamboo structure, and you didn't know how you will go there. Interestingly, once you're done with PhD, and I don't know how many of you finished your PhDs here, you realize that actually you are no better skilled than what you were 4 years back. And just that you have maybe a stick in your hand that you can balance a bit. And I find if you are an academician who is trying to bridge between academia and practice, then all of a sudden you go back and you're seen as an expert, and you're pushed in the front as if you have all this knowledge and skills. Now you lead a pack, and now we're going to build a bridge again. And I find that very, very unnerving. But the good thing about having a PhD in the end is that you are that 1 degree more confident. And you think that probably I'll take the leap of faith, and God help me, and I'll do it. But because I have a very strong feminist grounding and background, I feel very comfortable, going for bridges that might look purposeless for a while, or might not have any direct, structure to itself. So all this epistemological positioning of subjectivity, reflexivity, going beyond, all this suits very well in my research. I cannot imagine doing a research that is not subjective, which is, again, probably, I won't get much jobs, but if you're a PhD student, I say just go for the bridging, and, you'll be fine. And it is good to be subjective in the end.
Thank you, Joshi.
Thank you. Now, when I was growing, I dreamt of going to a good university, and I achieved that. And late I thought I needed to go for a master's in my dream university, actually outside Africa, and I'm almost achieving that. I'm enjoying my RP, my research paper, and Cameron was telling us that all that he has gone through, all these years of experience, the much has added it to knowledge, and he tells us that kind of the bridge, building bridges is an endless process. You add knowledge, you accumulate knowledge, add it, but you will never get to the end. I wonder how you draw that sense, the sense of accomplishment within you. Do you reach somewhere and feel I have added enough knowledge and this is my time to rest? It's kind of a boring environment. The academic environment seems to be boring and meaningless at the end. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you. More voices. Duke. And Chi.
So I was thinking being at ISS, I mean, I have been here for 4 years and getting to know a lot of people coming from different places. I have made this talk a lot about people changing at ISS, and this happens like more radically with the economists, which is itself, I think, a telling thing, is that, you know, people come with their professional backgrounds, with their sort of mainstream education, let's say, and here they feel changed, and it is a very, I think, at the personal level change. But what I feel is that they sort of feel like crossing the bridge from the mainland, coming to the island of ISS, but then there is the going back. And what I feel is like, yeah, when you go back, there is a loneliness there because you are not actually fitting there, but you cannot stay here as well. So it is like people, I feel like a bit stay in the bridge. I mean, and feel like when they go back home, it is very difficult to bridge with the people over there, both at the personal level and especially in the professional life, and especially if you are an economist, of course. Like, yeah, the other day a friend was talking. I mean, I was, you know, educated with the view of we are going to do things, we are going to build and construct things. And the first thing I come here to learn is to deconstruct. I mean, it is a really difficult change. And I think like being on the bridges is also a bit of a loneliness here. It's a difficult situation here as well. And yeah, people when they go back, maybe they actually, the transformation here, yeah, is not that strong actually. I feel like it is a bit, you know, sad to say this maybe, but because you cannot stay alone there, you actually fit back into what you have learned before. Like, yeah, the transformation, the bridge crossing, you know, it goes a bit, and then, yeah, maybe you have to go back because you feel alone in the end. So, I know.
Our leader of DD.
I have two questions. Am I allowed to? Okay. Why, from your collective conversation, one is the concept of languages. Just recently, I found out I'm actually puzzled and in a little bit of a kind of feeling a little bit trouble in a reflexive way, because, and you mentioned it, Catherine, with the term development, with the term market, and in my particular case, with the term education. At one point, I feel that we deconstruct everything and every term to a point where I'm not too sure if we can, how to move forward with one sentence. Because except for maybe the, a, and on, and even the but, you can also deconstruct the but. So how to, excuse me. But how do you move forward from just deconstructing everything? And then the second angle to that is, and I just realized that a word that is translated into English can carry a completely different worldview in another context, completely different. So when you are communicating in English and you're working in another context, how to deal with that. And again, it also associated with the different words that are in one thesis or in a piece of research, but can carry so many different meaning. And within one research project, how do you deal with this in a way ethically and then that reflect our wish to be inclusive? And I just learned that inclusive is also a problematic word. So, but you know what I mean. And then the second point is the travelers on the bridge. Throughout this whole organization, we never thought about the travelers on the bridge. And that related to John's point about actors. And so it just triggered this thought in me that I wanted to share, to add on to it, is there are travelers on the bridge, and many times, actually very often, we don't build bridges by ourselves. And so, yeah, it's something that I wanted, a thought that just came up, and I just thought of, this is true. Bridges can never be built by one person, even though the PhD process can be very lonely, but when you are building bridges, you're never alone. So that's it.
Thank you very much. Someone else? So let's give the mic here again, because there were some questions to and reflection to the three of you, and maybe Jon also.
Sorry, Ricky? Thank you. Thank you for all the kind words that people have been saying. Very nice. Thank you. I've been scribbling down here sort of pictures of things. I can't reply to everyone. I'll reply as if I'm replying to everybody in a single statement, yes? And then if you feel I haven't talked about what you wanted to talk about, then of course you can come back in again. Yes, we can have time for that. I have 4 words in my mind that have come from this, listening to this exchange. First is communication. It seems to me communication is key to this. Who do you wish to communicate with? And I think quite a lot of the confusions perhaps here are people have different readerships. They have different mixes of readerships. And that's a real challenge. Who's standing on your bridge with you? Is it people like yourself, in some sense of the term? Is it academics of a more conventional kind of intellectual mindset? Is it people who are happy to take apart the emotional from the body, from the rationality? So who's on your bridge? Who's going to stand on your bridge? Who do you want to be on the bridge with? And that, I think that relates to the loneliness that Doigu was expressing as well. You don't have to be lonely. What you have to be is clear about who you are trying to impress. And I suppose the notion of authority is about impressing people. It's about communicating to people in a way that they actually feel they have added to their knowledge. That within their coming into their identity, that this actually communicates with them, and they feel it's an add-on, an addition to their knowledge. And I agree with you. Different groups of people have different knowledges and different views of what adds to their knowledge and what subtracts from their knowledge. So that's the first word. First crucial word is communication. And that relates, I think that's at the core of all my epistemological efforts. The second is commoditization. And I think that goes beyond markets, as Catherine was suggesting. We are in a process that seems to be commoditizing more and more elements of life. I mean, I'm going to put that up as a structural ontological statement, that commoditization is a real process that is really occurring, and we have to relate to that. And in general, in international development research, we're not very happy about this continuing, increasing commoditization. We do have a stance with respect to it. So that's my second word. My third word, and this relates more to the question of agency, so commoditization is my word that relates to structuring. My third word relates to agency is commitment. And here I think I'm getting quite a lot of feel here that researchers should have a commitment. And that's an important word for me in this debate. That is, there should be some sense of engagement which goes beyond the engagement you might have if you were studying cosmology or quantum physics and things like that. That somehow in international development we have this word commitment, which is ontologically, epistemologically important to us. And the fourth one, I thought I was being so clever because I had communication, commoditization, commitment, all nice sort of alliterative kind of connecting words, yes, at least in English. And then, of course, you throw a spanner in the works, and now I've had to add to that accomplishment. And that's, it doesn't quite fit. It's almost, but it doesn't quite fit so tidily. I think my sense of accomplishment and avoiding the boredom element is I've basically intellectually retooled about every 5 to 10 years over a period of the last 40 years in which I've been an academic. It's tended to be a feeling that I was adding on to something that was still there. But when I talk about my own subjectivity, I could take you through a history which appears at times to be quite fractured in terms of my intellectual positions. So whether I would have been as kind to Shushi 30 years ago, I'm not quite sure. I would have been saying, come on, where's your class analysis here? I want to get a feeling of the working class is present within this. I'm more relaxed. I became more relaxed about that as we get towards 2000. So I think those 4 words, yes? Communication. Who are you communicating with? Who's on your bridge? Commoditization is a key overarching umbrella word for understanding structural processes or thinking about structural processes. Commitment and the peculiarity of, I'll call it development research for the moment, although I'm equally, in a way, unhappy with the word. Development research, what does commitment mean in terms of the relationship to the academic? And then accomplishment, this idea that we ourselves as researchers are perpetually on the move. We are perpetually changing as well. Yeah? We're not observers who have taken up position and then always observe the world the same way. Well, let's say I think healthy researchers are like that. That doesn't apply to all academics, some of whom seem to enjoy retreading the same ideas over a period of 40 years with no problems whatsoever. But I would suffer then from the boredom threshold and wonder why I was here. Okay, does that move things on a bit? I mean, I'm not sure that's a complete answer to everybody's fun, but it's sort of what you've stimulated in me. Yes, sure. Catherine, do you want to? Yeah, we've got microphones out.
Catherine or Rosalba?
Well, let's see here. Let's start with Chi. I mean, the issue of deconstructing, right? Deconstructing is a very modern word, right? I guess first structuralism, then post-structuralism taught us to deconstruct, right? Foucault's excellent in teaching us how to deconstruct, right? But where does that take us? And I think that's what you said, we deconstruct, but then what is the construction? Where do we go with that? And I think that's, again, part of the problem oftentimes with the academic world, that if we're in a so-called critical space, the critical nature of criticalness is to deconstruct, but it's not to construct. Or it's to construct in a very limited way, right? As the individual, as the authoritative person, the researcher who comes out with the authoritative article that says, okay, I've deconstructed this concept, and now here is the new construction that you take as the solid, the good truth. So I think what that brings into consideration is, what are the ways that maybe the peoples, the context, particularly in something called development studies, what are the ways that people construct aspects of their lives that maybe challenge what development means, maybe looks for better conditions in their life processes, and how do they do that? Those are constructive processes. But oftentimes they're not our departing points in academia, because we think the departing point has to be that authoritative, solid knowledge that's called research, that's called academia. And so I agree that academia can, in that sense, is a very boring place. I personally spend as little time as possible in the academic setting, because I think if we don't have 1 foot or maybe 1.5 feet out, we're not going to go anywhere. And so I think those are important things to think about. What does it mean to really deconstruct, not just in an academic or linguistic sense, but what does it really mean in an epistemic and political sense? And how do we begin to look at different kinds of creations and constructions and start from that? The other is sort of thinking a little bit about John's 4 words. And I was surprised at the last one, at accomplishment. Because when he started with communication, what made me think about is that this is a more shared enterprise. Like you said, who's on the bridge with you, right? That academia, research, intellectual pursuits are never individual. They're always engaged with others. The issue is how we make visible that engagement, and those others are not.
But accomplishment is sometimes an individual goal, an individual task. So if we begin with the social, with the shared, and we finish up with the individual, aren't we somehow going against our beginning project? And so I sort of offer that as another point of reflection.
Well, for me, it's now very difficult to react because there are so many ideas on the table. I found myself trapped. Chi, again, your question is very provoking on the pretentious and not very humble attitude of the construction, and realizing what Catherine has very well articulated, trapped in the exercise of destroying. I actually sometimes call it destroying, not necessarily deconstruction, for the sake of writing a paper, publishing in best journals, etc. I have found, of course, I don't have like an experience of 60 years or so. My academic life is not so long, but I have found 5-7 scholars so far that have actually inspired me to go beyond, let's say, deconstruction and trying to start to realize, let's say, how to build the bridges again. One of them is just sitting here, so that's what for me is very difficult to add something to that. But in my own trouble within academia, I have realized that the answers sometimes are not lying within academia, but are actually lying outside academia, are actually among the people who are struggling for many different reasons, justice, gender justice, environmental justice, whatever, put a name on that. And that academia sometimes doesn't offer us the, forget about the theories, even the epistemological ground to make these constructions visible. So one way in which I have been resolving this dilemma in which I found myself through deconstruction and deconstructive tools was first of all, by asking myself something that in the past some other academics critical on development have been asking themselves: how practices of a struggle, of everyday struggle, that I can, of course, from my situateness, from my partial gaze, that I can interpretate how these experiences of a struggle are actually helping me to challenge some of the concepts that I have been using. So this is one way of started traveling through the bridge, but not necessarily bringing the ropes and the material that you need. For that, I agree with some scholars who said that we need new grammars, that we need new, I don't know if new, but that we need a grammar that is, in Spanish it's called sentipensante, that means that brings emotions and again our thinking, our rationality together, and that might, of course, in a creative way deconstruct our idea that we are only rational beings, but much more than that. And there is a lot of proposals hanging around within academia, within and outside academia, for grammars that can actually bring this connection between our emotions and our way of thinking. I teach very much on this through Boaventura Sousa Santos, you know that, all this methodology of making or trying to make visible all these knowledges and ways of being that have been not lying there as invisible, but actually that we as academics have actually actively produced as inexistent, as if they were irrelevant. So there are some tools here and there. The question is how far, how much in this very lonely and painful travel that we call PhD, we can actually bring them without something that Angelica was saying, without damaging ourselves, without actually damaging the reasons why actually bring us in the first place to do a PhD. And for me, that's actually an unresolved situation. I'm not worried about the new grammars, the tools, but I'm more worried about how bringing these ways of making visible some of these ideas, some of these struggles, actually act harming us, harming our intentions, harming our expectations. And I'm thinking on my own trouble, on the idea of having a PhD, on crossing the bridge and crossing the Atlantic. I'm originally from Mexico, and having all these illusions of, oh, the PhD is going to bring some kinds of tools that I cannot get from practice. And after ending my PhD, very similar to Suchi, I realized, okay, I lost some knowledge, some tools in the process of becoming an academic, and I gained another kind of set of tools that allowed me to be here now and talking in this way to you. But the crucial thing there, to which I don't have an answer, as I have already mentioned to you, is how to bring it into the process of doing your research in a way that is also healthy for you, for your or mental, actually, and emotional health. And this is something that is not easy to do. Now, so I don't have a question, an answer. The only thing is that deconstruction, in many cases as a tool, leads you to irony. And I can only remember my really tough times in the UK being very sarcastically and ironically addressed on the issues of my research, and how violent irony was for me. How violent to be confronted by this negation of hope, negation of ways of understanding irony that is necessarily not, funny. So for me, deconstruction is sometimes, resembles sometimes this route in which I don't want to embark, but therefore we have to go outside academia. To continue with our conversation, John, I would like to ask you something, because you say something about communication. And I, of course, when I'm confronted with the supervisees that come to me and ask, let's try to see how can we develop this research or this other, of course, we always have in our mind which is your audience, with whom you want to communicate. And thankfully, many of the people with whom I'm working in their masters or in their PhDs, they want to reach people that is not only academics, but it's actually communities or collectives to which they belong. And I, of course, ask them to whom you want to reach. And in many cases, I say that those collectives, I want to translate this research into something that is relevant from the collective to which I belong. And, but my observations on this is that it's not enough just to ask to whom you want to reach, to whom you want to impress some kind of ideas about this or this other problem of your research. Is why you want to reach these people, and why in academia we are forced, almost forced, to reach in a particular way to our academic colleagues in order to produce authoritative knowledge. So I'm constantly pushing for self-reflectiveness in the students with whom I engage, in order not only to identify which is the target audience, but why they are actually wanted to reach this specific audience that, thankfully, is not only academic, the academic sphere in some of the experiences that I have had. So it's not only about identifying, it's asking yourself why this community of practice, or this community of intellectuals, or this office in government, and how the geoepistemic and geopolitical positioning that you are having in that moment is actually leading you into realizing, oh yes, I want to influence the prime minister as actually your audience, your target audience. But anyway, this is of course something that I have been working since my time here in ISS.
Thank you very much, Rosalba, Catherine, John. I see some hand rising there. Satya.
Thank you very much, all of you. My journey has been actually, my background is in natural sciences, and when I moved into ISS, I got into a completely a different kind of a discipline. But one of the issues which I find that has not been taken up at all is about the question of accountability. Who are we accountable to? Because, which is also links to language, because I've seen many of the research theses and papers which has all been researched on a group of people and written in a language which is not theirs, not just metaphorically, but also in the literal sense. And were it to be translated, it could be extremely damaging. And to me, that is a very major issue of ethics and accountability. The second question is, I have always straddled the academic and the movement, because most of my research till now has been part of issues thrown up by various movements. I come from India. But this is the first time I'm picking up an issue which is very important, but which is not a question that has come up from a movement. So we are looking at issues which is not being raised by people themselves, but in a larger sense. And the reason why I decided to do a PhD is linked to the fact there is an entire academic mafia, which I would really call it a mafia, where to engage in discourse with that is extremely difficult. I mean, I have done it, but a PhD gives you that handle, which is more than just a balancing thing. So I think if you could take up these two issues. Thank you.
Yes. Good morning. My name is Patricia Paramita, and I am a first-year master's student in Anthropology and Development of the Graduate Institute, Geneva. And, well, I'm far from doing my PhD, and I'm probably like way behind most of the participants here. But taking further the discussions about stepping out of academic, I will start with my own experience. I worked for ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta for a few years, and that's where my curiosity about development flourished. What I saw when I was working there is nothing is going on there. It's like all the development projects stopped at certain level and they don't really reach the ground. And I came to this institute to do my first master degree in development studies, and I want to see, like, is it like that in academic discourse? What are these practitioners been told about their projects and their ideas about development? I came there, and then the first thing they asked the students in the first day was, okay, why are you here? What do you think about development? And most of them in this institute that I'm not going to name says, we want to change the world. There is this idea of knowing what's better for others, and how development studies is not driven by curiosity, but by pre-established idea. And as I went through the whole process of learning there, I saw how development studies were designed to produce practitioners to actually function in a pre-established system where donors, aids, and all the agencies are placed there. The voices are there, the bridges are there, but what I saw was like, those are a one-way bridge. It's the questions about who can afford to cross the bridge and what is transported on the bridge. There's an idea being transported, but there's the, from the development practitioners to the target, but it's not two-way street. The ideas on what is going on the ground is not, they don't reach the people on the other side who actually design the projects of development. And there are lots of voices, let's say, in that institute. And I asked myself, okay, who are the professors here who are not also a consultant for the UN? here almost everyone. The ideas were translated, but not in a balance. So for me, it's not only building the bridge, but also making the bridge a two-way street. And going beyond the idea of bridge, I'd like to see the idea of web, so it interconnects different places, different people at the same time, and not only like from one place to another. Thank you.
So now we have the last time to our conversation for now. Just a brief reaction from you about these important issues and topics that our colleagues are raising right now. But this is not going to be the end. We'll continue, and tomorrow Catherine will start again. This is an issue that we decided with this methodology to create a kind of continued dialogue. So tomorrow we'll continue talking about it. You'll continue discussing this point of view during the breaks, coffees, lunch, panels. But for now, just some ideas or inspirations that you want to share with regarding the last comments.
Okay, Rosalba, take that one.
Just one brief
Yeah,
thing.
sure, that's right.
Talking about tools that are available, of course not unproblematic and with limitations, and that requires you to take a position in relation to how you value a tool or not. When John and some of you were talking about commitment, the first thing that I thought about it was the methodology of committed research, or collabor, that is co-working, that is being developed in some places in the world. Why I'm thinking on that? Because of what you was just mentioning, Satya. Because one of the point of departures of these methodologies is the question of accountability, to whom we are being responsible, to whom we are supposed to be, accountable in the process of doing research. So when I'm saying there are tools there for doing research that is, I wouldn't say sensitive, but that is politically commitment to be accountable with particular position in relation to actors of development, but also that has been invisibilized by development. There are tools. So I wouldn't be so pessimistic. There are some developments there for people to engage with them. And probably we can continue talking about this later on, probably tomorrow. Yeah.
Something that I think maybe we can take up again tomorrow as well, but in terms of development studies, I think it's interesting to think about development studies as what people do to others.
Mm-hmm.
But one has to ask what kinds of development happens here. And so even within the European context, within the context of the Netherlands, etc., isn't there a need for development within, not development of those others, but development of the people present here?
Yes, that came out, I hope, with my citizens to be is a global question, not a question for any particular subgroup of humanity. The word I've written down here, which I thought was an umbrella word, was tyranny. The idea that power is exercised and close power is exercised and removes agency from large numbers of people. Close to, for me, in terms of the kinds of questions that she was raising, is closure. I mean, a good deal of development research these days looks at closure statements, statements where people in power seem to be too confident about their ability to describe the world, indeed to show how the world is, as well as how it should be from their perspective. And you all need to ask yourself the question of, who are you being critical of? There is, I think it was said earlier, all research involves an element of criticism. Who are you criticising? Okay, if you look back, I can't believe in the 1950s and 60s, it was peasants who were criticised. They were mindless. They were traditional. They weren't doing what they were what the technocrats told them they should be doing, or what capital told them they should be doing. Unbelievable past. But I mean, still some of that hangs on. You look at some writing, and it's still, FAO goes out and tells people what they're supposed to be doing, and and then complains when they don't do it. So keep an eye on who are you criticising. Who is being treated critically for the purposes of your research? And if the answer is no one, then you haven't really thought it through. Okay, that's a tough thing to say, but perhaps that's okay. We'll get more on that.
Okay, thank you very much for your time and participation in this starting conversation. Thank you to John, Catherine, Rosalba, for our colleagues, and all of you again. Welcome to ISS. Welcome to debate with us. And we want that you can keep this questioning attitude, looking at the next activities within our program. So sometimes we just come to these events to present our paper, and that's all. So we just want to have a space in which we can ask and we can question ourselves about what are we doing right now, from where, for what, and how are we traveling, changing, moving, being challenged by that. And so let's see how we finish tomorrow by the end of the day, and let's take notes or register for yourselves how are you starting the day today. And then maybe we can share tomorrow how we can end the event, and then we can think with Lenka and Maria how we can continue bridging voices or disconnecting from those voices or reconnecting with others. Let's see what happens. Welcome to ISS. Have now the break, and Tamara is going to introduce some remarks for the next steps.
Thank you, Angelica. Thank you, John, Catherine, and Rosalba. As Angelica mentioned, this discussion will be continued throughout the program, and especially tomorrow we have another session of open discussion. Some of you raised questions about the cards that Lenka and Maria presented earlier, so I will first ask Lenka to provide more explanation about the cards. Please, Lenka.
Thank you. Also, for those who came a little bit later, I would like to briefly just say what these cards are good for, because in your registration packages you will have 3 cards of 3 colors, and this is kind of tool how to involve you in building bridges at this event. And I think it was very nice that John and also Catherine and Rosalba and most of you emphasize a keyword, communication, because we would like to communicate about ourselves in the academe, but also it was said a couple of times with those who are not in the academe and how to do it, with who we do communicate. And we are using these cards of 3 colors, giving you opportunity to share your voices, to communicate with people from different backgrounds, different knowledges, different sectors, different ideas, different regions. And we decided that we can share with your colleagues from academe, which is the green cards. So maybe you would like to share something with your colleagues who are from the academic ground, saying, please, can you be more honest in your research, or can you just write more clearly to me? I don't know, it's up to you. And then we have cards, red one, for government. So is there any message you would like to, based on what you hear here, get across to those working for government? Please hear us. And then we have a pink one, which is for NGOs. So if there's any kind of idea, message, recommendation to get across to colleagues, friends from NGOs, So please write down the pink one. Maybe something like work with us. I'm just giving you more concrete examples. Doesn't mean you have to agree with me. It's not about, actually this is something we would like to, you are involved, you share. And please use this opportunity and we will work with your ideas tomorrow further, because we already heard very, very interesting things. So it will be a pity if it's not heard. And please use these cards and send them to our metaphoric mailbox, which will be in the places where the coffee breaks will be held. And also feel free to ask any questions. Okay, thank you for this space again.
Thank you. You saw some people leaving. That's not because the event is over. It's because we have a meeting with some of the PhD students. So those who left probably have to be engaged in that meeting. So I apologize for that. Next, we will have registration. As you noticed, we started earlier this morning, so we didn't have a registration process at the beginning, but we start directly with the opening ceremony. So after this, we would have about 1 hour registration, and then we would have lunch, and then parallel panels in the afternoon after lunch, 2 parallel panels, 2 sessions, and after that, networking dinner and entertainment. Before we go to register ourselves to the registration desk, I have several announcements to make before we leave this room. First, there would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panels this afternoon. There is conflict and post-conflict studies, and the second one is social inclusion and minority groups. Both would be organized between starting from 1:45 to 3:15 in room 426 and room 314. You would have this in the program. Gertrude E. Simón will chair the panel of conflict and post-conflict studies, and Max Regus is going to chair the panel of social inclusion and minority groups. The next round of panel would happen on 3:25 to 5 o'clock. First is the panel of food security and poverty in 426. Chaired by Rosel Rivera. And then the second panel is of health and market failure in room 314, chaired by Binyam Afewerk. And there will also be another panel, parallel panel of theories and practice in civic innovation, building bridges among politics, markets, and gender sexuality, that will take place in the atrium upstairs, first floor. Also 3:25 until 5 o'clock. This panel is part of the CIRI conference that is going on at the same time with Development Dialogue. Second, for all participants, please register yourself and get your conference package at the conference registration desk. We would have about 1 hour for the registration. During that time, I would also ask the presenters to go to a special desk for presenters, where you will recheck which panel will you be in, and you would also deal with some administration things. And please also bring your USB sticks with your presentation to the registration desk so that you can give it to the person in charge for the presentation submission. Third, we have AAD registration for free membership for the online journal. You would find a desk in the registration area labeled with AAD registration, and there you can fill in the form and put back the form that you filled in a box that you will find there. Lastly, almost lastly, is that after the second round of parallel panels at 5, we will have networking drinks and dinner at the atrium or butterfly bar. This will be accompanied with entertainment provided by us as students and staff. Lastly, finally, but not least, tomorrow we will start at 9 o'clock here in Aula B, and thank you very much for your attention. Have a nice day.